So, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I would like to warmly welcome you at our conference, EU-Russia Relations, Where Do We Go From Here? I'm Piotr Buras, I'm the head of the ECFR Warsaw office. The conference organized jointly with the Center for Polish-Russian Dialogue and Understanding. Sławomir Dębski, the director of the center, will chair the debate. And let me tell you that this panel discussion was preceded today by two very intense sessions devoted to the topic of our conference, closed-door sessions among Polish and international experts discussing the current state of this relationship and the challenges for both the EU and Russia. And we, of course, thought about it while giving this title for our discussions, Where Do We Go From Here? This here proved to become a moving spot, because when we started thinking about this event, we thought actually about the challenge posed to the European Union by the Eurasian integration and the Eurasian Economic Union project. Today, if anything is certain, this is one of the conclusions, I think, from our discussion, is that this project is probably ultimately dead. But there are many other uncertainties as far as the EU-Russia relations are concerned. We don't know what happens not within 1 or 2 years period of time, but we are uncertain about the very near future with regard not only to the bilateral relationship between Europe and Russia, but especially with regard to Ukraine and maybe also Moldova. So there are many questions we raised during our sessions, and but I have had the feeling that we were quite short of recommendations or really good ideas how to get out of this mess, and short of recommendations for the EU policy towards Russia, and also how to maybe change Russia's behavior, because that was at least for most of us, I think, the main concern. But I think this panel will provide us with a lot of insight and good ideas. And I thank you very much for your interest and for coming this afternoon. And I pass the floor to Sławomir Dębski, who will introduce our panel and will chair the debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, yes, thank you very much, Piotr. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your coming. Thank you very much for your interest. EU-Russia relations are today in very difficult moment. We have, as Piotr already said, we have engaged ourselves in debate about the state of affairs in relations between EU and Russia all today morning and afternoon, early afternoon. And now we'd like to share with you some of our thoughts. It is a great pleasure for me to welcome and introduce to you an excellent member of this panel. Starting from my right, Sergey Utkin from Moscow, one of the most critical and interesting minds trying to present and explain to outside world Russian foreign policy and international relations. It's a great honor, a great pleasure that we have this opportunity to hear him today. Then we have James Sherr, which appears quite often in this city. One of the most interesting and well-known experts worldwide on Ukrainian affairs, Russian affairs, NATO-Russia relations, and last but not least, Europe-Russia relations. He's an author of very topical book, which has just appeared, and the title is, I think, also very telling and very timely formulated: Hard Diplomacy and Soft Cohesion. And of course, it is a book devoted to Russian policy towards immediate neighborhood, particularly Ukraine. Then on my the closest left side, Marie Mendras, the author, also very, I think, timely appeared book, The Paradox of Weak State, the Russian politics, and in which she presented extremely interesting analysis on how internal politics became a driver of foreign policy of Russia. And I really encourage all those who are interested in, first to pick up both books and read it through. And if there are any publishers among all of you, I strongly recommend to consider publishing these two books in Poland. And on my far left, extreme left, I would let me formulate in this way. Adam Eberhardt, also very known individual in this city, the deputy director of the Center for Eastern Studies, one of the best analytical institution globally, I would say, focused on Eastern Europe and developments, political, domestic, in this part of the world. So we, both of us, I mean myself and the honorable audience, have an excellent opportunity to listen views of these people behind this round table on that what's going on in Ukraine and between the EU and Russia. I asked my colleagues behind this table to divide their introductory remarks in two parts. I wanted them first to share with us their take on the state of affairs between Europe and Russia after or during, if you wish, Ukrainian crisis or crisis over Crimea. Different approaches are also acceptable. Then I will like to hear some recommendations from them. Okay, we will hear where we are, and we would all like to know how we could come out of this mess. And I would like Sergey to start and be the first who kick off the agenda of our debate today. Sergey.
Thank you, Sławomir, and thank you for inviting me. And if Adam is far left, I hope I'm not on purpose far right, and at least this is certainly not politically true. And actually, I would like to start with a brief description of how the dramatic events that we see today seen from Russia. And when I say from Russia, you have to understand that there are different groups of the population. You have different kind of experts, different kind of political activists. So you should not think that Russia is absolutely united on this issue, even if you have this impression from opinion polls, from what you can hear from the media. It's still a very acute political discussion on what we see in Russia's foreign policy today. I have for a number of times heard that these events that we see today were not expected. That no one could really believe that this could take the form it actually took. And in this regard, I would like to say that on the one hand, yes. On the one hand, you never can predict the events as they unfold. On the other hand, if you look at the famous book of Samuel Huntington, The Clash of Civilizations and the Remaking of the World Order, you will find a map of Ukraine, which is split, which is representing the results of the first presidential elections between the fight between Kravchuk and Kuchma, and this was used by Huntington to show that this kind of country is actually a case that supports his idea that civilizations are fighting each other, and they find it very difficult to live in a unified polity. So if you have such kind of split inside the country, you have a problem, in his view. For a long time, I thought that Huntington is wrong in many respects, and I still cannot exclude that in the long run we will see that his concept in general doesn't work. But in the short term, when we look at the events in Ukraine, we can actually see some arguments that support the case made by Huntington. You see that in his book he writes extensively about Crimea, about what happened in Crimea, about an attempt to create a republic or even secede from Ukraine that was taken in 1990s. And he even quotes a certain high-level Russian military who was saying to one of Western researchers, you know, it may take 10 years, it may take 15 years, it may take 20 years, but the east and south of Ukraine will return to us. So it will not be forever that we lost these territories. And in this statement, you see the reflection of the position that exists in Russian discourse, in Russian intellectual debate, and which can be called either conservative, because in every country you have different kind of conservatives. It depends on what kind of past you have. And this position can be called conservative in the Russian political spectrum, or you can call them neo-imperialists. You have people who are sure that the way for Russia to develop in the future lies in restoring Greater Russia. They were for all those 20 years saying that Sevastopol is the Russian city, saying that Crimea is Russian, saying that Transnistria and South Ossetia are not just small regions that are insignificant, but they are kind of outposts, the avant-garde of restoration of the Russian greatness. For all this time, I was absolutely confident that this set of ideas leads nowhere. That this set of ideas will not produce any positive result or any result whatsoever. So these are just people who are nostalgic about the past, and they may never even hope to have their ideas implemented. But now we see that at least a small part of these ideas, and actually Crimea was always quoted as the first priority in this set of ideas, conservative set of ideas. We see that at least one of those these priorities is now coming true absolutely unexpectedly in many ways. So on the one hand, it's unexpected. On the other hand, you can find an intellectual tradition that supports this case. we also have different intellectual traditions, and if we do not just talk about every analyst, every political leader, but talk in general, you can call a different political tradition the liberals. These liberals actually believed all the way that Russia is part of Europe, that Russia is a European culture, and it has to behave itself as other European states do, also in foreign policy. That we have to get closer with the European Union, that we can establish more intensive cooperation with the EU first, and probably even, at least some people were saying that, to become a member of the EU one day. Who knows? Because if you look not at the geographical scale of Russia, but at the demography, you will see that it is the biggest European country. But comparing it to China, to India, is not possible. The only way for Russia, in this liberal set of ideas, the only way for Russia to play a global role in 50 years would be to cooperate closely with the EU or to be part of the EU. So very roughly, this was a different set of ideas. And you could even find some official statements coming from people in the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs actually supporting this case. They were saying, yeah, we are the part of the same Euro-Atlantic civilization. We share the basic values, the basic ideas that made the Council of Europe to be established, and we do not deny any major value that was first formulated by the West. Now it is getting different, step by step. I would say that the first, the starting point in this regard was probably the elections of 2011-2012, when Putin and people who support him in Russia understood that they will not be able to capitalize on the part of the society that some call creative class, kind of a middle class of liberals who would like to live in a more European way, who would like better working democracy, and they just understood that it's not really possible to have what they would like to get with Putin. These people were mostly concentrated in Moscow. So that's why the protests that happened after these elections failed. And after that, the conservative trend that you could find in some Putin speeches before, this conservative trend became obvious to everyone. It was reflected in how the state media were functioning. It was reflected in statements of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Now you can find in these statements the blaming of the neoliberal West imposing its values on Russia, this kind of thing. And this pretty much the basis on which you could construct this conservative project or neo-imperialist project. The question that we face today, and this is the last thing that I will say, is whether this trend will continue, whether we will really see this conservative agenda unfolding without any limits, or it will be stopped either by natural obstacles that exist, some limits of resources, Russian resources, or because of environment where Russia has to face the political lines of the European Union, the US, who certainly don't like this kind of developments, or we will see de-escalation. we will see the willingness of the Russian government to stop at this point and not to continue with this conservative trend. This is one of the possibilities. Many experts in Russia believe that this is the case, that we have already passed the highest point of the crisis, that from now on we will restore our relations with the European Union. Unfortunately, I don't see enough arguments to support this idea of de-escalation happening right now, but you can find quite some Russian experts who believe this. It's up to it's up to next couple of months in the view of the upcoming presidential elections in Ukraine to support or probably deny this idea of de-escalation coming. We are still in a very volatile situation, and the situation which is very unfortunate. In general, I would call it a large catastrophe, both for Russia, for Ukraine, and for the European Union in terms of what kind of prospects we have for the future.
Thank you very much, Sergey. And thank you very much for this last thought, that the Crimea crisis was a catastrophe for both sides. You said also that, among other things, that we haven't been surprised. We shouldn't be surprised by the fact that Russia took over the Crimea, that the idea was somewhere in the air for a long time. And there are liberals and conservatives in Russia, and that the conservatives driven us to this mess we are dealing with. I'm not going to challenge this point. I will use it as a point of departure for my first question after this introductory remarks. Then I pass the floor to James Sherr.
Thank you very much, Sławomir. Let me begin by reinforcing Sergey's first point. Everything that has happened up until the annexation of Crimea was predictable and predicted. And I think it's fair to say the four people on this panel were amongst a small group of people who did predict much of this. The problem is that we pretended, and many of our governments pretended not to know what they knew. For 22 years, Russia has officially, not covertly, connected its own security with the limited sovereignty of its neighbors. For the same period of time, it has stressed the importance of using Russian compatriots very broadly, very loosely defined as a geopolitical instrument. Again, this has been open policy, not covert. For 10 years at least, Russia's leadership has, in opposition to the EU and its scheme of values, constructed not only a rival integration project in Eurasia, but a rival scheme of values based on civilization, culture, Slavic and Orthodox identity, not confined to the Russian Federation border. Second point, what calculations guide this on the part of the leadership? And most importantly, but not exclusively, Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin and the inner circle of the Russian leadership, and in fact much of Russia's wider elite, connect the future of the post-Soviet, the fate of the post-Soviet order in Ukraine with its fate in Russia itself. So the interests and stakes for these people and this system are very high. Secondly, where the stakes have been high, Putin has consistently played a high-risk game. So far, maybe we are seeing an exception now, he has not been reckless, the risks have been calculated. One of the calculations is that he knows that European elites have matured in a low-risk culture. He senses, I believe correctly, that up until now, in Europe, the business interest has been more important than the geopolitical interests. His view has deficiencies. He is as deficient as a strategist. He has a fundamental misunderstanding about who the Ukrainians are and what they think and what they are capable of. I think also he has underestimated the Muslim factor here and the resonance created by the problem of the Tatars in Turkey and in the Muslim world. Before moving on to recommendations, which I will do very briefly, my last point as far as the significance of this, the implications. What Russia, despite these views, has been co-signatory to all of the basic legal and normative pillars of the post-Cold War system, which are based on sovereignty and independence of new states as well as old. And Russia is in violation of its own state treaty with Ukraine of 1997, which set no internal conditions at all on its unqualified recognition of Ukraine's territorial integrity. There has not been one case in 14 years where in any international forum Russia raised the question of the mistreatment by Ukraine of its Russian minorities. And this has been the record. For us not to take this seriously, including the Budapest Memorandum, which was signed as the quid pro quo of Ukraine's unilateral nuclear disarmament, has profound implications for the non-proliferation regime, and our behavior is being watched very closely, not only in Moldova and Latvia, or dare I say in Poland, but by others, by Japan, by China, by Iran, by Israel. Now, the final 2 points remaining to me, my recommendations. I think we need to understand that the people who run Russia today will only change their behavior when they conclude that their current policy is damaging Russia's interests and their own. And for that reason, I would say the point for us is not to try to punish Russia, or at least do what we think will punish Russia. The point is to deny Russia its strategic objectives. And that means in the short term and long term focusing on 3 areas. First, to sustain, reconstitute, and revive Ukraine on a firm, democratic, and secure basis. Secondly, to accelerate steps already in motion to progressively diminish our reliance on Russian energy resources and complete the EU's energy market. And third, to revive NATO as a serious military instrument in Europe. If the people who matter in Russia see that by taking Crimea, A, they have lost Ukraine, B, they have lost the South Stream project, C, they now have a real threat in the form of NATO rather than a fantasy, this will have an impact. And my last point, in less than a minute, is that the dynamic is moving very quickly. And although we cannot solve any of the problems I mentioned in the short term, we do need to change the dynamic very soon, so that the uncertainties, dilemmas, and anxieties are transferred from here over to there in Moscow. Thank you.
Thank you, James. I think that from your initial statement, we should all understand the following. Russia, or Russian conservatives, as I was put it by Sergey, or Putin, they are playing the existential game. Either they win, or he wins, or all will be over. I mean, all existing system of power in Russia be over. So departing from this conclusion, we have to understand that everything may be possible if this existential interests are on the stake. And recommendations presented by James are: first, help to Ukraine; second, energy security. We should diminish our reliance on energy resources, and we can do that. And third, NATO. We have to put the alliance in order and make them once again very effective. So, ball goes to Adam. So you have your 7 minutes to share with us your thoughts and recommendations.
Okay, thank you, Sławek, for invitation. First of all, let me say that we tend to perceive things and political process in a way we call it, we name it. So I would not dare to call the current crisis a Crimean one, because Crimea was just the first domino to fall, but it was not the most important, for sure. Crimea is being perceived by Russia just as a starter, as an appetizer, if everything goes well, or a consolation prize, if it doesn't. We see how it develops. My first observation regarding state of affairs is that in recent weeks, Putin has dramatically spoiled his reputation among European Union states. Putin's Russia is widely perceived as a source of instability, unpredictability, as a security threat for Europe. For the first time in recent years, European Union member states do share the diagnosis regarding Russia. Certainly, there are some marginal groups, but we are talking about policymakers, about expert community, and I would stress that we share the diagnosis. But the key question is, does the similar perception of Russia and Russian foreign policy lead us to the similar conclusions? Will it support cohesion of the West and of the European policy vis-à-vis Russia? And my answer would be yes and no. Yes, when it comes to European Union-Russian relations at the strategic levels, to European Union-Russian relations as such. I think, I hope, that the recent development may serve well our community. It may serve as a cold shower in fields of energy, security, defense. Certainly there will be no miracles. I doubt anyone can really believe that European Union will be able to have a single voice when negotiating energy prices. But some reasonable decisions are quite probable when it comes to third energy package, when it comes to South Stream, when it comes to Opal pipeline, and so on. When it comes to security issues, including military spending, it could also strengthen transatlantic links, I hope. NATO hopefully will be back to Europe, to European politics, to European strategic thinking. Whether US administration is able to re-pivot to Europe, I doubt. I have a feeling that the President Obama is a lame duck when it comes to foreign policy today. Quite early, 3 years before the end of his term, but I'm afraid it is too late to change. And there will be certainly no business as usual with Russia. No illusions, no wishful thinking about strategic partnership for modernization, and all these slogans we are so used to. So the process of redefinition of EU-Russian relations will advance, but as I said at the beginning, similar perception of Russia and Russian foreign policy will most probably not support cohesion of Europe, of the Western Europe, when it comes to Ukrainian crisis, when it comes to dealing with the challenges we face today. Quite contrary. Ukraine is important enough to serve us as a cold shower. Ukraine is important enough to serve us as an eye-opener, but Ukraine is definitely not important enough for Western Europe, for the West, to dramatically shift our foreign policy priorities. And I would even say more. With the higher stakes on the table, we should expect a growing divergence within the West on how to respond to Russia and to the Ukrainian crisis. There are certainly two main views. A hawkish one, to confront Russia. It is quite popular in Poland that it says that today, but deciding about the reaction to the conflict over Ukraine, we also somehow are defining our deterrence capability if a similar conflict should one day affect our community, not only its neighborhood. So Putin will go as far as he is allowed to go, and we have to stop him. We should show limits of his power. But it is just a hawkish approach. There is another approach, a dovish one, just to accommodate Russia. And I would like to stress that it is not advocated only by pro-Russian lobbies which are driven by economic interests. No. It is much wider. I think there is a clear aversion of any kind of confrontation among public opinion, and it was already mentioned by James when he referred to European community as a community which is not willing to take risk. So just, and certainly those people, those adherents of this argument, they also try to argue that there is no risk of escalation of conflict with Russia, which could eventually lead to a new Cold War. This set of arguments is voiced by some prominent scholars like Dmitry Trenin in Moscow, for instance, and I have to admit I'm quite puzzled. I'm quite surprised by the notion of a new Cold War, not only because, well, I know it is catchy, but it has no foundation in reality, not only because Russia is not a global competitor, it is not about economy, but it is not in Russian interest. A new Cold War is not in Russian interest because it would lead to a consolidation of the Western community in opposition to Russian government. It would make the West tougher, more assertive, and it eventually reveal weakness of Russia in all fields, including economy. So President Putin threatens us with Cold War in order to achieve something quite opposite, exact opposite. Russia wants a divided and submissive West that wants to avoid confrontation and to accept Russia's interest in the post-Soviet space. Just to conclude what to do, 3 points, or even 2 points. First point is to stay united. We need to balance hawkish and dovish approaches in order to stay united. And I would not, personally, I would not press European Union for harsh sanctions against Russia, because, first of all, it wouldn't go. It wouldn't be accepted by European Union, and it could easily lead to a split within European Union. I think that sanctions, it is mainly US job. They are much eager to go forward with this. We shouldn't allow Russia to play some states off against other states of European Union. But the second point is even more important. I would call it do no harm. So European Union cannot fall into Putin's trap and accept political solution which would be cut over the heads of Ukrainians and which would in effect turn Ukraine into a failed state. Certainly, Ukraine needs decentralization, but first of all, it is up to Ukrainians to decide. And secondly, Ukraine does not need cantonization, which is an aim of Russian foreign policy, which will be sanctioning of its de facto partition. So, given the lack of success in provoking riots in eastern and southern Ukraine, I think that Russia now sees negotiations with the West as the best leverage over Ukraine on Ukraine. Russia perceives talks with US and with European powers as a key instrument for achieving its political objectives in Ukraine. Putin well knows that once an agreement between Russia and the West is reached, which would accommodate Russian interests, demands, Ukraine will come under enormous pressure to accept it. So, to sum up, even if we are not able to support Ukraine, I feel we could, financially mainly, we should be very clear regarding our policy towards Russia, not to harm. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adam. And I appreciate very much particularly the fact that you have focused your initial intervention on the second part of our equation, I mean, the West. You said that Putin spoiled his reputation. Well, a couple of months ago, I wrote a piece for Bertelsmann Stiftung when I put the thesis that Putin doesn't care anymore about his foreign policy and his foreign reputation. Why this so? Because something much more important is on the stake. I mean, his political survival in that sense in Russia. So you said also that Putin harmonized in transatlantic world assessments concerning Russia itself and Putin's aim and interest. You also stated that we are in the process of redefinition of relations between the outside world and Russia. Where we are heading, that's an open question still. And there are two recommendations from you. First, that the outside world, I mean the West or transatlantic community, should stay united and should stick to the common approach to Russia as long as possible. And second, also very important, that's the way how I understood it, that we should not accept Russia's rule of the game in Ukraine, and my question will be, of course, whether on other aspects of this, the process of redefinition, we should do the same. More or less, there are thoughts which have been put on the table by you. Okay, and ladies and gentlemen, now I have enormous pleasure to pass the floor to Marie, who will have a chance to correct theses, thoughts expressed here by honorable gentlemen. Bride has already spoke out, and then the brightest now will speak. Marie, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a pleasure to be back here in Warsaw and at the Stefan Batory Foundation, and it's a pleasure to be with the best colleagues from various European countries and from Russia. I have only a few minutes, so what I'd like to do is tell you in a few sentences what it was for scholars and experts and in my case, a French scholar, to live this learning process in the last 4 or 5 months, before the Vilnius summit, which was a learning process and also a teaching process, because while we were all following developments that, yes, no one could fully anticipate, we had to explain to students, governments, EU Commission, Lady Ashton, we had to explain what was happening. So also give our analysis, and so it was a learning, teaching process in a way. It was a very great challenge. The first lesson, which maybe is obvious to all of you here, but I can assure you was not that obvious for the French public and worse, French elites, is that Maidan took place. It was a very big event. I was there in December. And yes, Ukraine exists and will exist. And only Russia and a few dictatorships like North Korea or Syria deny that Maidan happened, or the nature of Maidan, and are already rewriting the very recent history of Ukraine. The second lesson is that for years we've been talking, teaching EU-Russia relations. Now we know it makes no sense. We have to analyze and teach EU, Russia, and in-between states. And I think this is the end of an epoch. That never again will I attend a meeting in Brussels, Paris, or London where I'm asked to say something intelligent about EU-Russia without talking about Ukraine or Georgia or Belarus. And this is really a great achievement, I can assure you. So that will not happen again. That is the relationship above the heads of 6 countries, and in particular one big country, Ukraine. Ukraine, yes, it's been the heart of the matter and of the historical process. But the Vilnius summit with the Eastern Partnership, there are other countries, and this morning with our group of colleagues, we have discussed the question of Moldova, Transnistria, Georgia. So this is the challenge. It is Ukraine, and that I guess would be my first recommendation. Is yes, of course, the emergency is Ukraine, but let's not forget why Ukraine happened, why Maidan happened, why Crimea happened. It's just that you have 6 countries that are frozen, stuck between Russia and the EU, between Russia and NATO, and that Putin's bottom line is those 6 countries do not have to belong to Russia, but they can belong nowhere else. So they are frozen with their very weak sovereignty, weak economy, and dysfunctional state, and if possible, a frozen conflict or a separatist province on their territory. The third lesson, thanks to Maidan and Ukrainian development, is that the major stumbling block in Europe for Ukrainian future and is Moscow, the Russian authorities, and more specifically Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin. I can tell you again, 6 months ago, this was difficult to convey to most of our officials and even intellectuals, and not only in Paris, but also in other capitals. Now, you just listen to Mrs. Merkel or other heads of states and government. They do criticize Vladimir Putin. So this also is a great help in making progress in the understanding of the nature of the problem and in pushing through recommendations. And now I can say, and nobody will even try to contradict me, that the number one problem for us is the nature of the political regime in Russia. and the fear of democratic contagion. I can maybe, it's because it's my job, I'm a professor of political science. So when I teach my students, I always wanted them to have a clever, intelligent chronology, with events taking place in Russia, but taking place also in the in-between countries, in the world, in the UN. Well, I know I shouldn't talk more than 2-3 more minutes, but think about it. 2008, Putin invents the tandem thing. And it's also the year that the Georgia war takes place. There is already quite a problem in the functioning and legitimacy of the system. And then the world economic crisis. And then, 2012, maybe you remember that Putin got elected, a rigged election. He got elected in March. And, just I think a few weeks before Yanukovych signed the initialization of the association agreement with the EU. It was also March 2012, and it was after the Arab Springs. And so, yes, what was said earlier, that Putin and his system of rule, which I call the weak state, weak public institutions, strong clans. Yes, this regime is in a fight for survival, even if they look so strong. The thing is, was not that easy, to invade Crimea with Spetsnaz, because Crimea was already under military control anyway. But the fact that Putin did not dare go for a classic military incursion, and probably will not risk a classic military invasion of any other territory, I think tells a lot about the nature of the regime. So yes, we have a problem of legitimacy. The economic slowdown is now looking like economic recession. And I would stress this one point about Putin not anticipating developments and making some mistakes. And he is now isolating himself. He's spoiling his reputation. He is an outcast. If you take the votes at the UN General Assembly and you see only 10 countries, you can imagine which countries, vote against the Ukrainian resolution, then you have an idea that it's not an East-West problem. It's a bigger problem. So, the fourth lesson I'm drawing is that, yes, Vladimir Putin was able to launch a Spetsoperatsia in Crimea, and he's probably capable of continuing this Spetsoperatsia and maybe move on to some kind of Spetsoperatsia against the 25th of May election in Ukraine. Yes, he spoiled a peaceful revolution, and he transformed it into a highly dangerous crisis. But as was just said by Adam, now there is a consensus. And my fifth lesson, which I think everybody will agree with, but again, it was not that obvious a few months ago. Yes, there has been and there will be better solidarity within the EU, within NATO, within even the US and European countries, which is never quite an easy, it's not an easy path, and even a form of solidarity inside the international community. It's not the old Cold War divide. I fully agree with Adam. Two recommendations, if I may. The first, and I'm focusing on urgent recommendations, to fight back the huge propaganda machine coming from Russia that is extremely powerful in Russia, in Ukraine, in Belarus, in Tajikistan, but also in France. The pro-Russian lobby is very, very powerful. What I said earlier today, also I don't have time now, but I'll be happy to answer questions, is that the French position, the French can be a little stubborn, but the French position has been moving slowly and in the right direction. This is really a major breakthrough, I think, in Europe. So maybe we can discuss those ways of fighting the propaganda about Kiev being ruled by fascists or about Crimea being always Russian, whatever. But if you listen to the French media, you can see that those cliches are well rooted, and there's still quite a lot of work to be done. My second recommendation is, as of tomorrow, make sure that all our countries send people to Ukraine as long-term electoral monitoring, in long-term election monitoring missions, government officials, deputies, just as we tried to do with Maidan but did not succeed, is just be always present physically. That is, that Ukraine is a place, a friendly place where we have the right to go. We are not antagonizing Putin just because we visit Ukraine and support a peaceful change of regime, which has immediately organized a presidential election, and make sure that this presidential election is more or less honestly and competitively organized, and the person who will be elected will have a reasonable legitimacy, to start the very necessary reforms and to continue to face Russian subversion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marie. Thank you. I have the impression that a lot of your assessments have corresponded very well with view of others, members of this panel. Something which I would like to emphasize strongly is your thesis that Russia, and actually Putin, has introduced the existence of Ukraine into French public, maybe for the first time. You also said that probably this paradigm EU, Russia, and something in the middle has already gone. That it would be very difficult to think about relations between European Union and Russia in these terms in the future. And then you put on the table actually 3 recommendations. First, you said that we should not agree on Russians' new rules of the game and accept the notion that Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, and maybe something more belongs to Russian sphere of privileged interest. So I also understand that it would mean also that we should not accept Russian interpretation of international law. Then you said that we should try to fight back Russian propaganda, and then that we have to stay engaged in Ukraine first, send people there, and be present on the ground in Ukraine. And I think that's very important. We should try to encourage all members of the EU to send their people, not only our usual let's say suspects. I mean, Poles, Lithuanians, Balts, Germans, but also Spaniards, also Italians, all people from all the Europe. because it could contribute, and it would contribute to harmonization of the assessment, and it would keep this harmonization of the assessment what's going on in Ukraine on the certain level, which on the other hand is necessary to draw the conclusion and make the policy. Well, we are in a very good moment of this discussion behind this table. Now I would like to address to you a question which is very difficult, and I think is also of interest of all of us. The title of this panel is "Where do we go from here?" So my question to you will be, what the lowest common denominator may be under which we could find a common ground with Russia after all that has happened.
Shall we take more questions also?
As I kick off, I put this question first to you, and then I open the floor for other takes. Maybe I will start from Adam. Okay.
I just spoke, Adam. I have to think about some bright idea. Give me some time.
Okay.
What was the question?
Yeah, well, about the lowest common denominator.
Serve as a vehicle for all of us. I mean, Europe and Russia to find a solution and the way out from this conflict.
Well, my feeling is that the crisis will last for several more months. Russia was not effective to provoke riots in southeast Ukraine. Russia was not effective to start a civil war there. Russia looks like ineffective to derail presidential elections made this year. We don't know what will happen in coming weeks, but I would like to stress that both communists and Party of Regions decided to take part in presidential elections. There are candidates from their side, although Russia strongly opposes elections because of obvious reasons. Russian government would like to call the government of Ukraine illegitimate as long as possible, and fuel conflict in Ukraine. In Moldova, I would like to stress on Moldova and about the risk of igniting some troubles in Gagauzia, in Transnistria. And it leads me to an answer to your question, Sławek. There is no common denominator today between Russia and European Union and the West. Russia would accept a deal. A deal will be reached only if it meets Russian interests in the post-Soviet space. And Russian interests are extremely high, and it cannot be fully accepted and accepted by the EU and adopted by Ukrainian government. So there will be no deal in coming months. And my feeling is it is the best outcome of the possible outcome, because any deal today would mean accepting Russian special position in the Eastern Europe.
Well, but now I pass the floor to Maria and ask for her take on that. But I didn't mean any particular compromise or deal with Russia, but at least a certain, basket of, I don't know, norms or values, or how we identified it, which could ultimately help both sides to deal with the problem.
But yes, but Slavik, I think what we've been discussing all day is that there is no possible dialogue with Vladimir Putin these days. No, I mean it's just the fact is simply that it is very difficult, and it's sometimes even risky to engage in a dialogue. Remember last Friday's Putin's phone call to Obama, and you don't know what was said between the two men because the two versions are so completely different. And now this morning, Lavrov held a press conference where he said, well, no, I never told Mrs. Merkel that I would withdraw some of the troops. She must have misunderstood. So this is the crude situation. So, of course, there is, as of today, because of the military pressure and political subversive policies, there is no sober and useful basis for a one-to-one dialogue with Moscow. EU or NATO or the West. So it seems to me that Putin may be getting a little nervous when we stop talking to him. And this is what is really tricky, is how can we, keep him nervous, that maybe we can make some progress without talking directly to him. I think this is where we stand now.
Okay, I'm not going to stop irritate you. But I would like to irritate him even more for the purpose of our discussion. James, but okay, we are not going to sign the deal. We are not going to accept new rules of the game. But still, we do have a huge economic interest. From the one side, from the other, actually, there are many people around the world who are claiming that Crimea is done. Russia took it over, and nobody is willing and is able to force Russia to give it back to Ukraine. So we have to find a kind of the common ground. How do you react on such claims?
No matter how many ways you rephrase the question, the answer is there is no common denominator in today's conditions that can be consistent with our interests, our principles, and the minimal requirements of Ukraine's sovereignty and independence. Let me follow this up with just two brief points. It's not only John Kerry who says there needs to be decentralization in Ukraine, which I regard as an outrageous comment.
He says also the privileged interest.
But there are, I think, people in this room who once or twice have said that. I may say, as an analyst, not as someone with a right to comment, as someone who has worked in Ukraine for 20 years in all parts of the country, it's clear that what Ukraine does need is at regional as well as central level the creation of effective and respected and legitimate authority. This is to talk in a situation where Russia has already halfway succeeded in its core objective of making the country ungovernable, and into this mix to introduce something called decentralization, not to say federalism, it reflects a shocking misunderstanding of what we are dealing with. And just respond to your last twist of the question, I have yet to find a single person who can name an area in which we have a common interest with Russia, where Russia's interest is not at least as great as ours. Does Russia depend less on the European energy market than we depend upon them as a supplier of energy? Does Russia depend less on investment from Western business in its economy and the technologies and skills that come through this then we in the aggregate depend upon this? So I am very confident. I have one very positive thing to say about Russia under this regime and previous ones, that Russians are very good at understanding their own interests and will do nothing. They will do nothing to damage their interests as they see them.
Okay. Sergey, Have you heard these Russophones? No?
I did.
What's your answer to my question?
Well, I agree that there is no deal coming in the view. We could propose some ideas for a deal, but the problem is, as Marie said, that no one believes the present Russian government and Putin personally. So if you imagine a situation when we somehow restore this trust, you could imagine some kind of new document being signed confirming Ukrainian sovereignty and confirming that Russia will not meddle into Ukrainian business. But this is not in line with what we see in practice, in Russian political practice. And moreover, you have me sitting here, and I'm critical to the course that is the official course of Russia today. But we do have analysts who actually support this course, rather because they are professionally obliged to do so, but also those who support this course sincerely. And not only the radicals, not only the fanatics who think about restoring the USSR, not in this in this way. I can almost quote part of a debate that we just had in Moscow, where people who are more or less supportive of this governmental course say things like Russia is the only power that actually has a proposal for a viable Ukrainian state, which is the proposal of the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, federalization, the Russian language as an official language. So we just understand the complexity of Ukraine, and you just don't understand the complexity of Ukraine. This is what they say. Other people from the same pattern, they say, the problem is your association agreements. If you would just give up on those association agreements, it would be fine. Everyone would just trade with each other and there would be no problem. So they have proposals, but I'm absolutely sure that these proposals will not be accepted, and therefore we will have no deal anytime soon.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, now I open the floor for questions. It is not going to be a session of comments and questions, but only questions. And there are certain rules established by myself, of course. So first is that you have to introduce yourself. Second, you have to stick to the subject. And third one, third one, you have to be as brief in your question as only possible to give the time for the others. So I have first, yes.
Dr. Krystyna Maja-Wilczek, I just cannot resist to say that I've been on a 300 years of Russian Navy on Kremlin, where it was a big ceremony when Prime Minister was Chernomyrdin. And Russian Navy loves all these regions. They were thinking Sevastopol, so they wanted to got her love, and they got it. And if European Union does exist or not exist, it's not that important, the question is, but the very important is to create such an international organization which can give a peace guarantee for the entire world. Don't you agree with me? That's the question. And the third, I think Ukraine should get such a leader like was Bogdan Khmelnytsky, wake them up and create beautiful country. That's all.
We'll take 3 questions, in the round. First here.
Yes, hi. My name is Knut Detlers, and I represent the Friedrich Ebert Foundation here in Warsaw. And I would like to thank you very much for this very interesting discussion. And I have 2 questions. One would be to Marie. It's like, what do we do now? I mean, you stressed the importance of the 6 Eastern Partnership states, but what do we do now with the Eastern Partnership as the European Union? That, if you could flesh out. And the second one would be maybe to James, but also to Marie or whoever wants to jump in. What do we do now as a European Union to stabilize the situation in the Ukraine? Because my feeling is we actually do too little right now.
And
Katarzyna Skurzyńska from the Polish Institute of Diplomacy. Discussing the EU-Russia relations, we should take under consideration that the very important factor will be whether the EU strengthens its relations with Ukraine and other countries of EU Eastern partnerships. So the question is whether, in your opinion, the EU will be able to formulate the new policy for these countries, and how, which will be the impact if it happens on EU-Russia relations. Thank you.
The agreement was reached behind this table that I can take 2 more questions. So,
Rafał Jewdokimow, National School of Public Administration in Poland. Institutionalization of EU-Russia relations are actually frozen, working out the new partnership and cooperation agreement as well. And I would like to ask, what is the best way to talk with Russian authorities? To talk as a united Europe, I mean for European Union, to talk as a united Europe and maybe use European diplomacy, or just send or particular countries or group of countries to have a talk in name of European Union with Russian authorities.
So are you going to say, are we going to ask whether we should accept Germany as a kind of spokesperson of European Union in relations with Russia? Well, that's my interpretation, yeah. And the last question here, you know, the 5th row. Yes.
Hi, Matthew Luxman. I'm a student of international relations. It seems that there's broad agreement that the main issue is an economic one. So the way out of the crisis is to impose some sort of sanctions. But the recommendations that have been made, for instance, fighting the Russian propaganda machine or diversifying gas flows, they seem to be quite. There's no specifics involved in those recommendations. So how do you suggest that we diversify Europe's gas reserves when it's a very, very long-term and complicated issue?
Okay, so dear panelists, you can extreme right, okay, and you can make a cherry picking, you know, take all questions or some of them.
I will not take all questions. Certainly, the one that was the most interesting for me is the one on how to institutionalize the negotiations between the EU and Russia, and whether we can do it at all. Because, of course, again, we come to the problem of trust. You can have whatever format you can imagine, but if you don't have trust, if you have people who genuinely believe that they lie to each other, the formats will not work. And you know that all the accusations that are made in the EU towards Putin are repeated in Russia, just mirrored in Russia. They accuse the West of these same things. If you want to dig deeper into what is actually happening, I advise you to check the notion of psychological projection. Just check on the internet. It's precisely what is happening in the rhetoric of how this debate is developing. However, the problem is that we have already several platforms where the EU, or in broader sense, the West and Russia can come together and discuss things, be it in a rhetorical way or in substantial way. And mainly we have the institutionalized platforms of the NATO-Russia Council, we have the OSCE, we have the Council of Europe, and there is a danger that some people might think that they would punish Russia by excluding it from those high-level institutions. Actually, what can happen would be the opposite result. Because those core conservatives who support this neo-imperialist agenda, they are just dreaming about Russia not taking part in all those clumsy European structures that put limits on Russia's actions. They criticized the OSCE, the Council of Europe, all the way along, They believe that it's just the constraints that we don't need. So if you would think that you would punish Russia by blocking these ways, you would punish Russia, but you would not punish the conservatives who are in the core of these kind of policies. So it's problematic to deal even with the formats that exist already, and to establish new ones. I would not go precisely this way. We can use the existing formats if we want to. The problem is that no one can really make the other side believe that the willingness to achieve a consensus is a genuine one. And just one sentence probably on the perspectives of the Eastern Partnership. I know there are various ideas on how you can support countries in the Eastern Partnership, but it's easier to say than to do. And keep in mind that for about 10 years, in Ukraine, you had more or less pro-European government, pro-EU government, people who were ready to listen to your advice, who were ready to cooperate with you. And you could not really show any kind of visible result for the population of Ukraine. You could not come to the visa-free travel. You could not show them that the EU is something more than just talking about values and principles that are not reflected on the ground. I remind you that Moldova and Ukraine are among the poorest countries in this region. Ukrainian GDP per capita is 2 times less than that of Belarus, and the GDP per capita of Moldova is even lower. So if you cannot drive these countries in their economic development, if you cannot support them to become more prosperous, you will still have people complaining about the EU and saying probably we would be better off without this Eastern Partnership and with some other ways of development. Probably we should look at Russia as one of the engines that can can help to reshape our economies. This is the main problem. If you don't achieve prosperity, democracy and values will just be hot air that people will not buy.
Very good. James.
Let me separate the first question from the others because the others had a common theme. After not simply a guarantee, but a whole rules-based regime has been fundamentally, blatantly violated, and as a matter of principle, to turn to the parties concerned and say, don't worry about this guarantee, we'll give you another, in my view makes no sense. And even if I thought it made sense, it would not make sense to Ukrainians. So this is not, I don't think this is a fruitful avenue of diplomacy. Now, my own view, and this probably puts me in a minority, is that I don't think our preoccupation should be with punishing Russia. For one thing, as Sergey has partially reminded us now, as Nikolai Petrov, who spoke earlier in our panel, has reminded us, we're not very good at doing that. Also, you know, the West has been manipulated by people who are not honest like Sergey in the past, saying, oh, my God, if you are tough with Brezhnev, you will simply be making life easier in Russia for people who are internally nastier than Brezhnev. And if you are tough on Putin, this will strengthen people who are much nastier than Putin. Forgive me, that is something that Russia and Russians must sort out. I repeat that what is needed is to confront Russia with failure. And when when those who make policy today see that they have failed to achieve their objectives, a process there will start to take place. In the short term, I am afraid to say it's not a friendly thing to say, perhaps to Sergey and some others. In the short term, this can make things worse inside the country. It can lead to more repression and more authoritarianism. but there is nothing else that is going to produce a re-examination of first principles. And we've been here before. This is how Gorbachev started, looking at the consequences of failure. So I think this must be our focus. And just one last small point. The support from us, economics plays a large part of it. But as I tried to set out in the objectives that I mentioned, it goes beyond that. And a large part of it, there is a military dimension here. It doesn't involve risking conflict between any NATO state and Russia. But there is a huge institutional dimension. The Yanukovych regime, and in the end with the help of Russian special services, hollowed out much of the Ukrainian state. Destroyed communications, destroyed command and control, destroyed lines of subordination, internal structures. The Ukrainians need help from us to try to rebuild all of this. And this has to be a very important part. Thanks.
Marie?
Thank you. Yes, I think the question is not to punish, but to put an end to impunity, which is very different. And I believe this is what we do by the simple fact of existing. You know, European democracies exist, the EU exists, and those countries are ruled by law and possible sanctions. So it seems to me that that is, in a way, what you were trying to say, James, is that there must be a sense of limit to put an end to the беспредел. And when Sergey says and repeats that the problem number one is the problem of lack of trust, I think it is very much linked to the impunity. When there are no limits to what you can say and do, it's very difficult to engage in a productive dialogue. But I think it is really the moment of truth with your 2-3 questions of, you know, what can we do, the Eastern Partnership. So far we've been, I would say, positive, and I think it is important to pay tribute also to what the Ukrainian society has achieved with Maidan, because they had already achieved the Orange Revolution, which is, by the way, when the French public, like the German public, I guess, understood that, yes, Ukraine exists. But the problem is afterward they said it exists, but what a pain. So, you know, it's, I think what you are asking us is what is a middle-of-the-way policy for the EU when it's not membership, clearly, but it's no longer the wishy-washy kind of attitude that we've been having. And that inconsistent, and I think even rather dangerous attitude that we were having cannot continue, because what was underlying our sort of wishy-washy position was that, in fact, Russia was taking care, badly, or, you know, or where, but this was the subtext. Now, and I think we all tried to say, we can no longer fool ourselves, you know. There is no neutrality status possible for Ukraine or Belarus, or either they are under the security control of the Russian authorities one way or other, whether it's direct or indirect, subversive or traditional, or they need other guarantees for security and, of course, economic development, because economic development is the very fundamental of security. So, yes, I think, honestly, we do not know. And what the Russian revanchist attitude, because, you know, Putin wanted to punish Ukrainians for spoiling his, you know, customs union and virtual sort of Eurasian Union. He had a sense of, punishments and revenge. So we didn't think in Europe that we had to think a new policy that fast. Now we are faced with the issue and we have to invent, and this is going to be very difficult because, as you know, we have European Parliament elections coming up next month. I don't know about your countries, but in France, it doesn't look too good. Participation will be low in European elections, and the anti-EU movements and parties will be strong. So the reality is this is what we are facing inside our societies. So I think we have no choice. That is that our governments and the EU will have to come up with a good package, and together with the IMF also. But honestly, I don't think we have a clue of how to implement a medium-term policy of cooperation with the new government in Ukraine, with Crimea still occupied, and we don't know how we are going to restart a formal institutional relationship with Russia. And don't forget, there's another maybe minor institution, but symbolically an important institution that is dead. It's the G8.
Just briefly, well, I know it won't sound spectacular, but the best revenge against Putin is to help Ukraine to succeed at least not to collapse. We should remember that Ukraine will pay 70% more for gas. It will be $485 instead of $285. Ukrainian economy is collapsing with a decrease of GDP -3 or even more. And there is a risk that a social crisis transforms into a political crisis in several months. So it is crucial, and it is just to answer a question about the Eastern Partnership. I think it is to provide Ukraine with additional financial package is the cheapest, also on political terms, support for Ukraine, because it does not include all this political context which is so sensitive within European Union. Okay, no time, so I will.
Okay, so I will take 3 questions more. 1, 2, and there is still one place for one question. Okay, I will add from myself.
Okay, Piotr Kwieciński. Mike, I have a question to Mary Mendras. You have stressed the point that Russia is being isolated now in European, not only in European, but in the international community. Well, I wonder, is it really a fact of, is it really that important fact, taking into account the fact that the feeling of being isolated, that the idea of fighting alone against all the world is deeply rooted in a Russian national self-consciousness, and not since the Soviet times, but since 19th century and even longer.
Thank you.
There was a gentleman there.
Karol Bieś, Polish Forum of Young Diplomats. I've got a question. What about if European approach won't change and Putin won't move forward? So the status quo would be saved and Crimea would be Russian. Mr. Eberhardt said that 7 months and the crisis would be over, if I correct.
No, it will not be over by several months.
Okay, it won't be. Okay, great. Well, just so how long? How long the crisis would stay?
So I add my own question to this list, the last one, and this question will be about Poland. As as it seems that we are going to live with this problem for some time, what are Poland's attitude, what Poland's policy towards this problem should be? And I would very welcome your recommendations on that. And I will start from the left sector.
I think one issue we should have in mind is that there is no return to Russian-Ukrainian relations as we know them from before 2014. So Russia and Putin not only ruined its reputation vis-à-vis the West, but even more in relations with Ukraine, Ukrainian society, Ukrainian political class. Take major candidates for the post of president of Ukraine today who are running in elections. All of them are more or less from eastern or southern Ukraine. I mean Poroshenko, I mean Tymoshenko, I mean Tychybko. All of them are more or less pro-Western. All of them are more or less pro-democratic. Okay, well, all of them are oligarchic, of course, and they all have billions in their account. But I feel that there is an end of a paradigm of the relations between Russia and Ukraine. If Russia doesn't succeed to turn Ukraine into a failed or a failing state, it may end up with really challenges for Russia in the post-Soviet space. So it's why I don't believe Russia will be eager and willing to finish the conflict, to cut a deal, and it may last for many months, if not years.
Yes.
Yeah, it may, because well, it is so easy to impose trade sanctions. It is so easy to pressure Ukraine, and if Russia is not successful in achieving its goals right now, it may last for many months or years.
Excellent, Marie.
Yes, I think to answer your very relevant question about Russia's self-isolation, maybe that's exactly what Putin wants and what the Russian elites want. That's what some of my Russian students in France tell me is maybe simply the Russian leadership wants to be left alone, just do their own things, and the problem is it doesn't work. It doesn't work because the Russian authorities also want to have power. To be a spoiler, you need to keep power. And to be just a permanent member of the Security Council of the UN is not enough. And I urge you to look at the transcripts and the votes of the recent UN Assembly vote and also the Security Council vote of the 15 members. Russia was alone. And the big countries like China, India, South Africa, Brazil, they abstained because they didn't want to vote against Russia, but they certainly didn't vote for Russia. So I think this is where it doesn't work. And another argument where self-isolation cannot be a choice for the big Russian state, and it's the economy. Prospects are, the official prospects for this year, official Russian prospects, is very, very low. Officially they say 0.6, which means negative. Really, so this is a concern. My second comment is to the question of Russia's role in the world, and can it be a power and be isolated and just decide its own rules of the game. Look at Syria. I mean, the war in Syria. And to this day, Moscow supports Bashar al-Assad and arms this criminal regime. And the French position, my government position, really started to change in early September last year, when it was clear that the United States and Great Britain and France were paralyzed and could do nothing to convince Putin to stop Bashar. And that was a great humiliation in France, and it was the first big eye opener. And this is also why I think when the Ukraine crisis started, the French government was not prepared to give the benefit of the doubt to Putin. So isolation, what the president of the state does is to nurture conflicts or possible conflicts by forms of deterrence or pressure. I really don't think that it is in the continuity of the 19th century geopolitics.
What about Poland?
Do you want me to answer about Poland?
Yeah, what should we do? How should we behave?
No, I'm not going to answer this question in this room when you know far better. And Poland has always acted much better than France when it comes to Ukraine and Russia.
James, please.
I'm going to be naughty, but I can be naughty in 30 seconds. I missed an important question in the first round about energy, and in 30 seconds. There is no problem this year. Winter is over. We have enough reserves in our system to look after Ukraine this year. We then have a big challenge as far as next year. It is a challenge that can be met with difficulty in a systematic way. Ukraine has enormous leverage, do not forget. Ukraine has the option of raising transit fees. Russia has violated its agreements, some of which involve access to gas in Ukraine's storage facilities. In these circumstances, Ukraine has a right to act in its interests, and we need to support this. The big question, and I can't answer it, and it's a key question. Will Europe, in the interests of dealing with this European problem, be willing for a time, possibly a protracted time, to pay higher energy prices than we pay today? Because if we are willing to, and I don't mean doubling energy prices, but 10, 15, 20% more, if we are willing to, then even in the short term we have remedies. Now, second question I can answer very quickly. The gentleman in the back who said, there is now a new status quo and went further. It would be enough for me to say that there is no status quo today. That is the problem. There is no status quo because, as Marie and I have both been saying, Russia, by means of highly effective capabilities, is by stealth trying to do everything possible to destabilize and fragment eastern and southern Ukraine. Already, by the way, there have been some improvements because the Kremlin has been surprised. They really expected that with this Tolchok, with a bit of pressure, that these regions that they see as naturally theirs would come and support them. They haven't. So now the size of the demonstrations is much smaller, and but still, the talk about a status quo is an illusion. And on the subject of Poland, I'm not going to duck this. You've asked the question of our opinion, and we're all allies. We should express opinions. I think Poland underestimates its potential enormously. Poland is in the best position to point out an objective fact in Brussels, in Washington, that a failure to respond robustly and effectively risks dividing NATO. It risks the thing that all NATO members have feared since the 1990s, a renationalization of defense and security policy in NATO. Poland has already begun serious discussions and the beginning of planning with its Visegrad partners, and this can be extended to the Baltic states. Poland today has a significant contingent in Afghanistan, which is there for purposes of allied solidarity. I won't connect the dots, but if nothing is being done in reciprocal recognition of the interest in this region, there is a lot that you contribute that comes into question. And so in this respect, as in others, I think Poland has a very considerable potential.
Thank you. And Sergey, also about Poland, I would like to hear some your recommendation.
First 2 points, not about Poland. Just adding a bit to what Marie said to the questions addressed to her on this isolation issue. Indeed, if you look at the conservative worldview, isolation is just natural. They say, oh, you threaten us with the Western sanctions. The West was always against us. It will always be against us. We don't care about the West. At best, those who do not press too much for the isolation, they say, apart from the West, there is the whole world open for us. And actually, if you judge by these voting in the UN, I don't think that any part of the world apart from the West will follow with the sanctions after this voting. The voting is fine, but there will be no support for the Western stance on that when it comes to economic issues. So the thing is that this might not work in the globalized economy, indeed, and the isolation will just lead us nowhere. But it may lead us nowhere for quite some substantial time. We can go this way of an illusion, deception, probably something like that, for a long time, because the very word self-sufficient is the beloved word of the conservatives. We are self-sufficient. Our allies are our army and our navy. We don't need anyone else. And you know that at least in some European languages, as far as I know, in French, this word self-sufficient is used to describe a person who's sort of lonely and doesn't need anyone, as I have heard at least. So it can be a problem in the long run, but for quite some time we might live with the authorities who are absolutely confident that we can sustain this isolation. And here I come to this point of how long this might last. If someone of you believes that Putin can, in any circumstances, just give up on Crimea, this will not happen. And Putin is determined to stay there for at least the next 10 years. So if you make Crimea indeed the stumbling block that will not let us to go forward in any respect, then the crisis will just last for at least 10 years, and we will see where we end up by this point. As for the Polish policy, I find it very hard to make recommendations to anyone under these circumstances. It's the situation which I would be very glad to avoid, and I think all of us would be very glad to avoid, but we have to face it. And the choice that every country of the European Union has to make is whether they leave some fields where cooperation with Russia proceeds, so that we agree to disagree on the Ukrainian issue, but continue with the rest. or will it be a complete disruption of all kinds of relationships that can be disrupted? And I don't have a proper answer on what is the best option, because on the one hand, I can understand the logic of James Sherr. On the other hand, I still believe that there are people in Russia, apart from Putin and his team, who would suffer greatly if in their field there is just complete stop of any kind of communication with the West. And in 10 years, as a result of this, you may get not Russia ready for leaving Putin in the past and returning to normal communication with the West, but you will have something as Iran. So some people use the word Iranization in this regard, you know, a kind of very specific country which is specific in all respects and which is not willing to return to anything what was considered as business as usual 10 years ago. So this complete isolation is also a dangerous thing, probably.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to leave you with some conclusions, important points which I'm going to stress now. First, Russia has never won the war or struggle fighting alone, or it means without allies, particularly European allies. So if we'd like to draw some conclusions from the history, we have to come back to the thought that we should stay united. That's the first point. Second point, we have to stick to our core values. It means that we should not manipulate about these values, these core principles. We should not accept Russia's rule of the game. We should not accept Russia's interpretation of international law. If Russia decided to single out itself from the outer world, we can accept it, but there is no room for negotiation this Russian position. Third, we have to look very carefully after the developments in Ukraine. Somebody said today that the velvet restoration is possible. It means that we have to bear in mind why Maidan happened and because of what Maidan happened. And we have to remember this Maidan revolution is still in motion. I mean, people came to the street in Kiev to fight with the corruption, to fight with the system of the governance of the state, and inefficiency of the public services. We have to be very careful not to allow people from the past to come back, or the system from the past, to come back to the scene and set up themselves again in Ukraine, because it would undermine our credibility and it would undermine, let's say, the idea of approximation with the West. And last but not least, I think that's also very important thought. We should confront Russia with a failure. I brought it from James, but this idea has been shared by the members of the panel. It means that first we have to help Ukrainians, and first we have to help Ukraine to put their own house into order. And we should also confront Russia with a failure on other areas. I mean, international law, economy, energy security, and I think this basic notion is the good conclusion of our discussions today. I would like all of you to express your gratitude and say thank you to our panelists. Applause, please.